You wake up every morning hoping today will be different, that someone will finally notice you, that your phone will buzz with the message you've been waiting for, that you'll walk into a room and feel the shift in energy, the recognition, the respect you've been craving your entire life. But it never comes. You start to believe the lie that you're forgettable, that you're just background noise in everyone else's story, that maybe, just maybe, if you tried harder, gave more, smiled brighter, they would finally see what you've been screaming silently all along, that you matter. Carl Jung understood something most people never learn. He saw that the very act of seeking validation from others is what makes you invisible to them. That the moment you stop needing to be seen is when you become impossible to ignore. Jung called this the journey to individuation, the path from being everybody's option to becoming someone's necessity. These are Jung's 9 keys to being seen as a luxury. And once you understand them, you'll never beg for attention again. Jung believed that most people live in what he called the collective unconscious, a space where they mirror others instead of becoming themselves. They spend their lives performing for an audience that isn't even watching. You think that if you just do enough, give enough, prove enough, someone will finally choose you. But here's what Jung discovered. The moment you need to be chosen, you've already lost. Because luxury doesn't audition, it doesn't campaign for attention. It simply exists in its full, unapologetic truth. Your worth was never meant to be a question mark. It was meant to be a period, a statement, a fact that exists whether others acknowledge it or not. Jung understood that the people who recognize your value without you having to prove it are the only ones worthy of your energy. You've been taught to chase validation like it's oxygen, but validation is a drug that wears off the moment they stop giving it to you. And in that silence, you panic. You wonder what you did wrong. You retrace every step, thinking you could have been more. But the real betrayal was abandoning yourself just to feel accepted. Jung knew that individuation, becoming who you truly are, requires you to stop living for applause and start living for alignment. Because the person who truly knows their worth doesn't wait to be validated. They validate themselves through their choices, their boundaries, their refusal to compromise their soul for temporary affection. The moment you make someone else responsible for your self-worth, you hand them the power to destroy you. That's not love. That's emotional slavery wearing a disguise. And the reason most people remain options is because they live for approval instead of authenticity. But even when you stop begging to be chosen, there's still one trap that keeps most people stuck in mediocrity. Jung spoke about the power of conscious choice. He believed that most people drift through life, allowing circumstances to choose for them, but luxury demands intentionality. It demands that you become unavailable to anything that doesn't serve your highest good. This means you stop entertaining the maybe. You stop being someone's backup plan while they figure out what they really want. You stop accepting crumbs and calling it a meal, because every time you say yes to what diminishes you, you teach the world that you can be treated as an afterthought. Jung understood that boundaries aren't walls, they're gates. They decide who gets access to your inner world and who doesn't. Most people have no boundaries because they're terrified of being alone. They'd rather be misunderstood than misunderstood. But here's the truth Jung discovered. People don't value what they can access easily. They don't respect what has no requirements. They don't cherish what comes without effort. When you become unavailable to indecision, to half-hearted attempts, to convenient love, you force others to step up or step away. Your energy is sacred. Your time is finite. Your attention is a gift. The moment you start treating these as disposable commodities is the moment you become disposable yourself. Jung called this shadow work, examining the parts of yourself that seek approval at any cost and choosing to honor your deeper truth instead. You cannot demand to be seen as valuable while constantly choosing situations where you're treated like an option. That contradiction is what keeps you stuck in cycles of disappointment. Stop being available to chaos. Stop entertaining inconsistency. Stop explaining your standards to people who are determined not to meet them. Yet boundaries alone won't save you if you can't control what's happening inside. Jung distinguished between feeling and thinking types, but he knew that true power came from mastering both. Emotional detachment isn't coldness, it's mastery. It's the ability to feel everything and still choose how you respond. Most people are slaves to their emotions. They love when they're loved. They crumble when they're rejected. They chase when they're ignored. And they confuse this chaos for passion. But Jung understood that true strength isn't in reacting. It's in staying rooted, especially when everything inside you wants to run, scream, or chase. You must learn to feel deeply but hold lightly, to care without clinging, to love without losing yourself, because as long as your emotions control your decisions, you will always be vulnerable to the whims of others. They can lift you with a word. They can destroy you with silence. When people know they have that kind of access to your center, they stop respecting your boundaries. You become predictable. You become easy to unbalance. But when you master detachment, not as a defense mechanism, but as a conscious way of being, everything changes. You become a mystery. Not because you're trying to hide, but because you're no longer leaking your energy in every direction. People start wondering what you're thinking, how you're feeling, why you didn't react. And in that stillness, in that calm, you become powerful. There's a dignity that comes from not needing to prove how much you care, from not explaining every feeling, from being able to sit in discomfort without needing to resolve it immediately. Jung called this holding the tension of opposites, feeling the storm and still speaking with clarity. But emotional mastery means nothing if you're still performing for an audience that isn't even watching. Jung believed that authenticity was the highest form of rebellion. In a world full of performers, the person who dares to simply be becomes magnetic. Real presence doesn't come from being flashy or loud. It comes from something much deeper. It's the calm in your voice, the steadiness in your eyes, the way you carry yourself like you know exactly who you are, even when no one is looking. You want to be seen as a luxury? Then stop decorating your emptiness and start cultivating your essence. We live in a world where people have learned to dress up the surface while neglecting the soul. They master the performance but fear the pause. They speak in rehearsed tones, live in curated moments, and forget that presence isn't about what you look like. It's about the energy that follows you into a room. Jung understood that this energy cannot be faked. You can wear elegance, but if you don't embody it, people will feel the gap. They always do. Your worth isn't in how much attention you can gather, but in how little you need it. True elegance is found in someone who doesn't flinch at silence, who doesn't need to fill space to feel seen, who understands that their mere presence can shift a room, not because they're louder, but because they're more anchored. Stop focusing on visibility and start cultivating substance. You want people to see you as a luxury. Then become someone who brings value by simply being. And to do that, you must step into your own quiet power. You must know who you are when no one is clapping. Because in those moments of silence, most people fall apart. But you, if you've done the inner work Jung spoke about, you remain whole. There is no luxury in pretending. There is no elegance in needing to be everything to everyone. But presence without mystery is just another performance waiting to be forgotten. Jung discovered that in the depths of silence, we find our truest selves. But most people are terrified of quiet because that's where they meet their shadows, the parts of themselves they've been running from. Luxury understands the power of silence. Not the kind born from having nothing to say, but the kind that comes from having so much depth that words feel insufficient. When you master sacred silence, you become someone people lean into rather than tune out. There's a reason people stare longer at mystery than at noise. Real presence draws attention without demanding it. It creates curiosity without begging for it. It makes people wonder what you're thinking, what you know, what you've experienced that they haven't. Your silence becomes more valuable than most people's words. Your absence feels heavier than others' constant presence. You don't need to announce your worth because it speaks for itself in how you hold space, how you listen, how you choose when to speak and when to simply be. Jung believed that the integration of silence into your being was essential for individuation. Most people fill every moment with noise, internal and external, because they're afraid of what they might discover in the quiet. But you must learn to sit with yourself without needing distraction. In that practice, you develop a presence that cannot be bought or borrowed. You become someone who doesn't need validation because you've found completion within yourself. And that kind of self-possession is magnetic because it's so rare. People will try to break your silence. They'll poke and prod, trying to get a reaction. Let them wonder. Your job isn't to satisfy their curiosity. Your job is to remain true to your center, to your peace, to your understanding that not every thought needs to be spoken and not every feeling needs to be explained. But silence without standards is just another way to disappear. Jung spoke extensively about the importance of holding your personal truth, even when the world pressures you to conform. Your standards aren't suggestions. They're the foundation of your self-respect. The moment you start negotiating them is the moment you begin to lose yourself. Most people lower their standards in the name of connection. They think that if they just accept less, they'll finally be accepted more. But Jung understood that this creates a cycle of diminishing returns. When you accept crumbs, that's all you'll ever be offered. Your standards are not about being difficult, they're about being clear. Clear about what you will and won't accept. Clear about how you deserve to be treated. Clear about the quality of energy you're willing to entertain in your life. The people who ask you to lower your standards are the same people who benefit from your lack of boundaries. They want access to your energy without having to earn it. They want your attention without having to deserve it. They want your love without having to reciprocate it. But Jung knew that healthy relationships require healthy standards. Not impossible perfection, but basic respect, basic consistency, basic effort. And if someone can't meet those requirements, they're telling you exactly where you stand in their priorities. You teach people how to treat you not just with your words, but with what you accept. Every time you allow someone to return without accountability, every time you downplay your needs to keep the peace, you reinforce the message that you can be mishandled. Stop explaining your worth to people who are determined not to see it. Stop justifying your boundaries to those who profit from crossing them. Your standards don't need to be understood by everyone. They only need to be honored by those who want to remain in your life. But having standards without choosing yourself first is like building a fortress around an empty castle. Jung's entire philosophy centered around the idea that you must become conscious of who you truly are, separate from what others expect you to be. This process, individuation, requires that you choose yourself first, not out of selfishness, but out of self-preservation. You cannot give what you don't have. You cannot love others fully if you haven't learned to love yourself completely. You cannot be chosen authentically if you haven't first chosen yourself courageously. Most people wait for permission to be themselves. They wait for someone else to validate their dreams, their worth, their right to take up space. But Jung understood that this permission must come from within. No one else can give you the authority to be yourself. That's something you must claim. Choosing yourself means disappointing people sometimes. It means saying no when your heart wants to say yes just to keep the peace. It means walking away from familiar dysfunction because you've finally recognized your worth. This isn't about becoming selfish or cold. It's about becoming whole. It's about recognizing that you can't build a life on the foundation of other people's approval. That house will always be shaky because approval is unreliable. conditional, and often withdrawn without warning. When you choose yourself first, you stop being a reflection of what others want to see and start being the vision of who you're meant to become. You stop asking for permission and start giving yourself permission. You stop waiting to be chosen and start choosing the life you actually want to live. Jung called this the journey from the ego to the self, from the person you think you should be to the person you actually are. And that person, that authentic self, doesn't need to campaign for attention because their very existence is the campaign. Yet choosing yourself means nothing if you can still be shaken by every storm that comes your way. Jung understood that self-possession was the ultimate form of power. Not power over others, but power over yourself. The ability to remain centered regardless of external circumstances, to stay true to your values even under pressure. Self-possession means you cannot be emotionally manipulated. You cannot be guilt-tripped into abandoning your boundaries. You cannot be love-bombed into forgetting your standards. You've done the inner work to know who you are, and that knowledge makes you unshakable. Most people give their power away without realizing it. They react instead of respond. They defend instead of detach. They explain instead of simply being. But when you embody self-possession, you become someone who cannot be baited into chaos. There's something deeply unsettling to manipulative people about someone they cannot control, someone who doesn't flinch when threatened, someone who doesn't chase when dismissed, someone who doesn't break when rejected. That kind of emotional discipline forces others to see you differently. Jung believed that this self-possession came from integrating your shadow, acknowledging and accepting all parts of yourself, including the ones society taught you to hide. When you're no longer running from aspects of yourself, you become integrated, whole, unshakable. You don't need external validation because you've learned to validate yourself. You don't need others to complete you because you've discovered your own completeness. You don't need to prove your worth because you've internalized it so deeply that it's no longer up for debate. This doesn't mean you become cold or disconnected. It means you become discerning. You love from a place of fullness rather than emptiness. You connect from choice rather than need. You give from abundance rather than desperation. But self-possession without purpose is just sophisticated isolation. Jung's final lesson in becoming luxury is perhaps the most powerful. You must stop seeing yourself as one choice among many and start embodying the standard by which all other choices are measured. This transformation doesn't happen overnight. It's the result of implementing everything we've discussed. When you stop begging to be chosen, when you master emotional detachment, when you embody self-possession, you naturally become the standard. You become the person others compare everyone else to. Not because you're trying to compete, but because you've elevated yourself to a level that few people operate from. You've done the inner work. You've integrated your shadow. You've chosen authenticity over approval. The standard doesn't chase, it attracts. It doesn't explain, it demonstrates. It doesn't convince, it simply exists in such a powerful way that others can't help but notice the difference. Jung knew that when you become the standard, you stop fitting into other people's categories. You become someone they've never encountered before. Someone who challenges their assumptions about how people should act, how much they should accept, how little they should expect. This makes some people uncomfortable. They'll call you difficult, demanding, too much. Let them. Their discomfort is not your concern. Their inability to meet your standard is not your problem to solve. Because here's what Jung discovered. The people who are meant to be in your life will rise to meet your standard. They won't ask you to lower it. They won't make you feel guilty for having it. They'll respect it because they recognize quality when they see it. You don't become the standard by announcing it. You become the standard by living it, by making choices that honor your worth, by maintaining boundaries that protect your peace, by refusing to settle for anything less than what your soul knows you deserve. And when you finally embody this truth, when you stop being an option and become the standard, you'll realize that Jung was right all along. The journey to becoming luxury was never about changing how others see you. It was about remembering who you've always been. You were never meant to be chosen by everyone. You were meant to be cherished by the few who have the wisdom to recognize what they're looking at when they look at you. The question isn't whether you're worthy of being seen as luxury. The question is, are you ready to see yourself that way? Because the moment you do, everything changes. And you'll never settle for being anyone's option again. If this message stirred something in you, it means you're ready to stop settling. Subscribe to the channel for more insights like these and become a part of our community of like-minded individuals. Remember, the moment you start seeing yourself as a luxury, everything changes, and you'll never settle for being anyone's option again.